Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Minister of Justice Mamoloko Kubai has ordered a process of internal consequence management after United Nations Special Rapporteur Dr. Francesca Albanese was almost served with court papers at the Nelson Mandela lecture over the weekend. Now let's go back to Saturday. She's, of course, delivering her lecture, and within that moment, a sheriff from the Johannesburg Court comes through and is about to serve papers. They were doing this on behalf of the Christian Friends of Israel Communities, or the Christians for Israel USA. Two lobby groups, and bear in mind that both these lobby groups are overseas lobby groups. And they were serving these papers for what they claim were alleged defamation. Now, of course, in her role as Special Rapporteur, Dr. Albanese investigates and reports on human rights violations in the occupied territory, especially when it comes to the genocide that is happening in Gaza. Joining me now to take this decision, or to take this conversation, I beg your pardon, forward, I'd like to welcome Joe Bluen, who's no stranger to us here at Hilaal TV, legal expert, and of course she's also part of the South African Jews for A Free Palestine. Joe, always good having you on. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me, Faraz, and greetings to your viewers at home. Good to see you all.
No, absolute pleasure. Joe, what we saw on Saturday, were you surprised by this? Because I myself did not think that an overseas lobby group that, of course, has ties with Israel would do this. I expected something from a local perspective to occur. But for an overseas lobby group, were you taken aback by what had happened?
I absolutely was. I think it's important to see this obviously in the context of the fact that there were also the local, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies coming out with that atrocious statement saying that, attacking both the Nelson Mandela Foundation's director, Dr. Naledi Pandor, and attacking Dr. Francesca Albanese. And I think what we're seeing here is the ways in which there is this compounding pressure and how our domestic lobby groups really do work in tandem with overseas ones. And one of the things that we always say, is that when we talk about our movements needing to be intersectional, that our analysis needing to connect the dots between, for example, Palestine, Sudan, Congo, etc. We also need to understand that this kind of fascist, white supremacist internationalism that includes Zionism is deeply connected. So was I surprised? Yes, of course I was. I also kind of, want to contextualize this in number one, the kind of broader South African lobbying situation. And number two, the kind of evangelical Christian white nationalist lobbying that we see a lot of. And you see throughout Africa is these kind of marriages between these Christian Zionist genocidal churches and churches throughout Africa kind of spewing really dangerous ideas. And this is kind of part of that broader global lobby, I would say.
Joe, of course, you've got a legal analysis of this. So I want to touch on that just for this segment, right? What are the supposed legal loopholes? And I use the word loopholes because, quite frankly, what we saw on Saturday was kind of that being occurring. What are those loopholes that a lobby group or any international lobby group can use to try and file papers in a South African court, especially one here in Johannesburg? Is there a loophole or is there not a loophole? Because I'm still trying to figure out how these papers would have gotten to the Sandton Convention Center when this annual lecture was happening.
So on the basis of what we know,
Mm,
which I must say is I don't know anything more than what I've seen
mm,
reported in the papers. On the basis of what we know, this was actually not a loophole
mm,
so much as I'm just going to get the exact wording that
mm.
they used. So I don't. It's not a loophole, but it was actually a procedural error.
Okay.
That allowed this to happen, whereby a necessary, I'm just trying, sorry, I'm not a domestic lawyer, so I'm actually
No, no,
trying
no,
to
sure.
get the exact term, but the term
Mm,
that I would use is that this was not a loophole so much as an absolute bypassing
mm.
of due process that would be required in the event that sheriff's papers were to be handed to a foreign dignitary. I don't see this as a loophole, but as an important procedural matter that was bypassed by this sheriff, and what that speaks to more broadly in terms of the persuasive power of Zionist groups in South Africa is interesting. But as far as I know, it's not a legal loophole. It was done in error and in violation of at very least, our due procedures that are expected in these kinds of things.
Joe, you mentioned the word bypass, and as of course, Justice Minister Mamloko Kupai, given that this is a foreign dignitary, given that it's a representative of the United Nations, I mean, surely she would have known about this, or like you say, that word bypass, somebody clearly decided, well, we're not going to go to the highest authority within this various department. Um, how concerning should that be, given that this was done to somebody like Francesca Albanese?
I think the point you raise is really one that I am deeply concerned about. So thank you for raising that. So under normal circumstances, a request such as this would have to go through the minister and the director general. And it went through neither. So I think, as I understand it now, what the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development will be needing to go through is a full assessment of the processes by which that process was completely undermined by what happened. So I think that is, they have issued an unconditional apology. They have said they're doing an investigation, but you're absolutely right that there's no circumstances under which this from a foreign lobby group should have gone through, been issued against Dr. Albanese in the context where this hasn't been okayed by the minister and the DG. That's the rules. So I think you're absolutely right. How it went through, I think it's also very interesting in terms of what kinds of persuasions this is speaking to. How was this an innocent oversight? Was this a matter of lobby groups? We don't know. But I think it is a really, really distressing and concerning development.
Yeah, and the thing is, Joe, this was well timed because I mean, if they were going to issue these papers, one would have thought that this would have happened probably before the lecture. But I mean, if I were to understand this was done at the lecture, I think, number one, to gain media momentum, which I think it did on that day. But number two, to try and embarrass Dr. Albanese at such an important event, because this was an event that had a lot of traction, a lot of attention to it. So the lobby groups did quite good timing, and the sheriff's court within Johannesburg itself fell into this trap. It kind of looks like this is how it played out, given the magnitude of this.
So I think this is a key point. So let's think about the report, right? The latest report, or there's the economies of genocide and settler colonialism. The latest report, which basically says genocide is a collective crime, which means that third states that are liable either by their failure to take action to prevent an unaccountable Israel from carrying out a genocide, or because of their material, political, arms-based or social support for Israel in the context of this, are themselves liable. So we know that from the Genocide Convention, correct? So what that means is it's known in the Genocide Convention. It came out on that 16th of September report by the UN Commission of Inquiry, and now it's come out again in quite a no messing about kind of way in Dr. Albanese's report, the latest report of the Special Rapporteur. So that is quite a big message. And my sense is that one of the ways, I think that if you look at the patterns of Hezbollah, if you look at the patterns of whether it's Jewish Zionism or even some Muslim Zionism in the Gulf there, or even Christian Zionism, the patterns are quite simple in a way. And that is that when you cannot contest the facts, you end up contesting the person. And this contestation of the person or persecution of the person that is delivering the facts is part of what Neve Gordon calls a counterinsurgency strategy to, in fact, continue to allow for the persecution, the racially based subjugation, and the genocide of Palestinians in and beyond Palestine. So I think that's where I would place this timing, is that it is, of course, an attempt to delegitimize not only the report, but the author of the report in the face of, and let us just be serious for a second, when Donald Trump spoke at Knesset, I'm busy doing an analysis of the discourse that he used, and specifically the kind of civilizational racist discourses. But one of the things he did say as well was, he was boasting about how many weapons he's given to Bibi, as he said. He kind of went on this rampage about Bibi would call him up and ask him for more weapons, and he had the best. And,
Joe, I have to stop you there because we have to go to a break. I apologize. But we'll pick up this conversation after the break, because the question we're asking ourselves is, who are these groups that came in? And again, how was a foreign lobby group allowed to do this, and the concerns with regards to them getting our justice system to serve papers based on this defamation lawsuit that they want to bring. My conversation with Joe Bluen continues after the break. Welcome back. I'm still in conversation with legal expert and South African Jews for a Free Palestine member, Joe Bluen. Joe, right, I must confess, I did not know who these organizations were. The Christian Friends of Israeli Communities and a Christian for Israel USA. And then, of course, I did a research, and again, it's your typical Christian Zionist groups that are, lobbying for Israel within the United States. This comes at a time, obviously, when, the U.S. and South African relationship isn't at its best right now. South Africa are still trying to, extend the AGOA agreement right there. But these groups over here, it's quite clear what their agenda is. And you mentioned something quite important before we went to the break, that when the facts come out, they resort to tactics which are really despicable, to say the least. And this is a classic example of what we saw right here.
I think it's a classic example when we look at, for example, I don't want to go into too much detail because the JFP is involved in some ways in some of these cases, but the Equality Court cases that the Jewish Board of Deputies has brought against individuals for false claims of anti-Semitism, the use of the term terrorist, which we know, I think we spoke about this with regards to the drone attacks, that it's a terrorist attack if the alleged perpetrators are Muslim, and it's just warfare if just cause if they're white, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's all of these terms and ways in which they go for the individual. They will attack women on the basis of very sexist things. They will attack Muslim people and people racialized as Black or whatever it is in deeply racist ways. And part of this, they go for anti-Zionist Jews in a particular way as well. And all of this is part of a process where if you can't fight on the facts, you fight the person, number one. And if I may just come in with a further point here, I think it's very interesting that, a lot of the Zionist lobby groups are quite obsessed with the role of Iran, for example, in South African foreign policy or in pro-Palestine movement in general, and yet, and the international interference is something that has always gone to. And what I always say is every accusation is a confession. And in fact, what I think this points to is that who is really involved in the kind of international lobbying and international interference in the domestic affairs is certainly not the pro-Palestine groups, but the kind of anti-Palestine. And I think the evangelical Christians here really, I think there's a lot to be said for this.
Yeah, Joe, I must also again confess that I really thought that the legal papers or any sort of protest was going to come from the Israeli lobby groups within South Africa. And of course, they have every right to, because our democracy allows for it to happen. This is, of course, where we stand when it comes to the constitution of our country. But the fact that this, of course, came from the USA, again, was quite shocking. But this was kind of building up, even though both you and I were surprised by the events on Saturday, because when you look at the state of the Israeli embassy in South Africa's X account, already then they were kind of riling what was going to happen, because from a press conference, their comments were, of course, that of an anti-Albanese sort of perspective to it. So again, there was a build-up to this, but not, again, the group that we expected it to come from, what we saw on Saturday.
I think that's also very, very true, and also just an interesting indication of the kind of multifarious prongs of the Zionist agenda. So one of the things we also heard was that Albanese was anti-Semitic. And I will confess that I read the reports of this as I was coming out of really a wonderful meeting, a private meeting with the South African Progressive Jewish community, not just SAJFP, I will say, because we are, I suppose, more obvious friends of the that kind of thinking, but including with sort of progressive Jews from different spaces who are broadly anti-genocide at the very least. And we came out of this meeting, and then, it was such an interesting moment because we'd worked quite hard on this to kind of get it together with a kind of more diverse array of Jewish communities. And then to kind of come out and then read this, it was just so startling. So I think that one of the things that also does happen is that there is different pressure points. And the anti-Semitism one is clearly not really clicking for this. And so they had to use a different one. And I suspect very strongly that it has to do with US complicity. That would be, in the latest report, is very clearly shows US complicity in the genocide. And I would suspect that that is very much about, sort of what this is about, in part, at least.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, I was at that actual presentation by Dr. Albanese last week, Thursday, and her report was damning, and really it showed the roles of corporations, of course, within the genocide in Gaza. And that would definitely shake to the core many of the Western nations, especially the United States of America, which many of the brands originate from. But this report, what we saw on Saturday, I would like to believe that the solidarity of Palestine, human rights, the protection of human rights is winning, and quite clearly winning. And those who, of course, have the sentiments of pro-genocide, anti-human rights, they're starting to shake. And by them shaking, what we saw on Saturday was just an attempt which kind of failed, but it's not going to stop, because any big dignitary who comes to South Africa, which has that sort of take on wanting to support the solidarity of Palestine and that of human rights, will have the sort of pressure coming from them. And Dr. Albanese knew coming into South Africa, she was going to face that pressure from many of these pro-Israeli groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by the same token, if I may say, because I think this is, we also need to recognize that there are arrest warrants out for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. That there are also, I think we can also start thinking about it in terms of, the embassy here is still open. It shouldn't be. It absolutely shouldn't be. So yes, I think that we will see a form of escalated resistance to people that come in. But I think at the same time, with all the facts, for example, coming out about the South African IOF soldiers, more pressure getting, there for them to be arrested. I think it goes both ways.
Joe, one final question. Dr. Albanese is still in the country, but any group, any individual that kind of has this pro-Israeli sentiment to them, her report has shaken them, but also I'm looking at the South African public support for this. It has grown even larger than I expected. And again, I'm going to reiterate, this is not coming just from the South African Muslim community. This is coming from all corners. I mean, we spoke about, obviously, Christian Zionism, but the Christian community within South Africa, very astute pastors or priests have come out and supported Albanese and continued its support for Palestine and calling for the end of the genocide and the end of the occupation in Palestine.
Absolutely. And I think, and you'll have seen, we had separate sessions with her. There was a Jewish session, there was a Christian session, there was a kind of civil society session, a media session, as I think you'll know, and various different sessions. And I think the groundswell, as you say, of course, we work alongside and are led in many ways by our Muslim comrades, but it's not just a Muslim struggle, it's a settler colonial genocide. And we're talking about a colonial apartheid, which South Africans know about very well. So I think you're right, the groundswell is growing and growing, and it is from many, many places coming together. And I think some kind of united front, which is really quite something to behold, of people coming together from all walks of life, from different spaces, races, faith-based groups, to say this is a genocide, this is settler colonialism, this is apartheid, and we do not accept it.
Joe, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and all my best to you all.
That's
Thank you.
Joe Bluen from the South African Jews for a Free Palestine and legal expert. After the break, South Africa is off the grey list. This happened on Friday. What does this mean, of course, as we move closer to the G20 Leaders Summit? I'll be speaking to political economist Dr. Dale McKinley after the break. Do stay tuned.